Good evening, all. This is Professor Matt, and this is the Too Many Guys Soccer Show. And this is a weird addendum episode. When the schedule came out for this week, myself and Chelsea Mike were weirdly vacant, and we had questions. And then, our great leader, the Hefe, clued us in. Well, you guys can speak about Ukraine and these movement of Ukrainian players, young Ukrainian players to the West, and both of your teams are dumpster fires at the moment, and it will take entirely too long for you guys to explain why this is. So this is where we're at. We're going to discuss some big moves in regards to the Ukrainian Premier League, outgoing players, and one incoming player, which is a story that kind of went under the radar that I think is cool. And then I thought, Mike, we turn it over to you. You can give your analysis of the state of Chelsea. I have some questions for you, and vice versa. I'll talk about Liverpool, and feel free to ask me any and all questions. So, how does that sound?
That sounds good to me, Matt.
Excellent. Let's start with the Ukrainian Premier League, which is in the middle of its long frozen winter break. But a lot of business is done in Eastern Europe in the January window, historically. And we've mentioned this on the pod a couple times, independently of each other, together when we've discussed the Ukrainian League, that Ukrainian football's at a very weird place right now. All the geopolitical stuff aside, in so much that there's some legitimate talent coming up through their league system and young players in demand. And, we'll spend more time talking about Chelsea, but, your Chelsea, your London Blues got one of my favorites in Mikhailo Mudryk.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very welcome addition for Chelsea. I think the book on him is exactly what Chelsea need the most right now. He's a pacey guy. I think in European competition, he was clocked at the fastest speed this season. So Chelsea, we will talk more about Chelsea, but he's the kind of player that they definitely need right now. They need an injection of life into a moribund offense. His skill set seems to fit into what they need. And I think you've been talking about how Mudryk has developed as a
Yeah.
player over the last year. So I mean, maybe talk about more about what you've seen watching him on a more week to week basis.
So to jump onto your point about, the signing for Chelsea, and again, we can debate this till the cows come home, whether they were aggressively scouting him or whether they just wanted to steal him from Arsenal.
I
But
really like the second one better anyway.
well, it's a very Todd Bowley move because, speaking as a Yankee fan, that's what the Dodgers do. They see that we've identified someone and they're like, we have to go get him now. So what I can say about this guy, he came to my attention. He was part of that Ukrainian under 20 team that won the U20 World Cup a few years back. And he didn't play that much, but the first thing that struck me was, as you said, his pace. Dude is fast. Dude is really fast. And dude is an out and out winger or, outside forward, as opposed to one of these number 10s that you're trying to fit into those kinds of roles. His passing is quite excellent, and that's something that his speed and his passing are something that I've always seen. For me, the two biggest things are he's a 22-year-old, but he has the footballing IQ of someone who's 25, 26. He's a very, very intelligent player. And my beef with him for a while was watching him in the Ukrainian league and, in the national team setup was he kind of reminded me of like a thinner Slavic Adama Traore. Really fast, really smart, good passing, can advance the ball to where it needs to be, but his finishing wasn't that great. Over the last year or so, that something has clicked. And he's scoring goals in bunches. I think it might take him a couple months, maybe, the rest of the season to get fully acclimated to the English game. But he's one of these guys where I look at his, profile, and considering he's only going to get better the next couple seasons, you're talking about a guy who could be one of the better left wing, forwards in European football in a couple years. I'm
Sure.
a big fan of his.
And it's what Chelsea needs. And I agree with you that it's probably going to take him a little while to get acclimated to the English game. I mean, Andrei Shevchenko came over and just, part of it was the situation. I mean, he was playing with and behind Samuel Eto'o, who was,
Well, and wasn't Jose informed he was signed by Abramovich at practice?
yeah,
Abramovich was
yeah,
like,
he
"We
was,
signed you, Shevchenko."
yeah,
Jose was like, "What?"
there was no plan for Shevchenko, and I get that. Obviously, when I was in Ukraine, Andrei Shevchenko was the name. But I think, given the circumstances that are going on at Chelsea, I think I'm sure they'd like to work him in and sort of get him into sort of these other competitions, but they're not in any. And their team is so banged up right now that they literally just need bodies. I personally think that the best way to get Mudryk into it would not to be to start him, although they really need a left winger, like a pure one. Um, but it would not to be to start him, to sort of get him into these other come on as a substitute, and especially in a situation where they might be chasing the game and where his pace could really open up a defense that's sort of blocking themselves in.
I think him as a super sub off the bench if you need a goal, or a guy who you can just have run at a defense, is probably his best role, at least this year. Give him a full summer of training, get him fully acclimated with, Potter's system. But yeah, no, and I think he's in a good situation long term because Chelsea has guys who can fill that role, but they don't have a guy who's actually a specialist in that role. So
Right.
the job is going to be his when he's ready and when he's want to have seized it.
Sure. I mean, the people who they've been playing in that role, Pulisic wears 10.
Yes.
Mason Mount's Instagram handle is mmount10. They're heavy on guys who should be creators behind a center forward. But another problem is they don't really have a pure center forward. I mean, Aubameyang, and Joao Felix, I worry about them trying to push him into that role. But there's a lot of questions. It's an ongoing project.
Do you guys
I think
do you guys still have the young Albanian kid, or is he banged up? Or
Broja's banged up.
okay.
Yeah, he's hurt and out until at least next month too. So that's injuries are a huge problem, but that's what's so worrying for me about bringing on Mudryk is he going to get the seasoning so that he doesn't become sort of a Ukrainian burnout. I think that was sort of the knock on them, on Eastern European players, but specifically Ukrainians coming over, that they just didn't have the pace. Rebrov was another one who came over. He was Shevchenko's big partner at Dinamo, and then both sort of
the most underrated strike partnership of all time.
right. So I mean, and he just burned out at Tottenham. So I really hope they can work him in. I know Chelsea's an ongoing project, but we definitely need a person to come in and inject pace and life into that offense, because it's been more.
I think the fact that it is an ongoing project bodes well in that sense. And the other thing there too is, you mentioned Rebrov, you mentioned a lot of these other guys. Shevchenko, it was again just it was a bad situation. It was a manager that didn't want him there. He was hurt for a long time with your guys. Like there were like 3 lost years there with on the training table. I think what makes Mudryk's situation a little bit different is for finally, because I've been saying this for a decade, been banging the fist like Khrushchev. Yo, when these kids are 22, 23, not when they're like 18, because I think time in the domestic league serves them well. But when they're in their early 20s, not when they're in their late 20s,
Right.
get them to the West, because
Yeah.
that's when you're really going to see them be able to develop and develop to their full potential.
True. And I think I know the Abramovich sort of philosophy was a little bit cruel in the way it treated people. It was like, well, we'll just bring in 5 really good guys every year, and maybe 2 of them will actually work out, and the other 3, they'll be on our books forever.
Yeah.
I don't think Todd Bowley wants to do that. I really do think he wants to work with Graham Potter and build around these pieces that they're bringing in, to create a cohesive team and not be spending. I know it doesn't look like that right now, but I think that's the indications to me of what they want to do, and I think that bodes well for Modric. You get someone in behind him, whether it's Ben Chilwell, or whoever they're going to put there, and build something. And I hope that they do that, because the piecemeal thing, it's not going to work without exceptional injections of capital, which is going to be unsustainable in the long term.
The Berlusconi, Abramovich model requires a Berlusconi or Abramovich. So
Right.
let's shift gears to a guy, and part of me as a Dynamo Kiev fan is sort of sad this week because he's been our best player, our most consistent player for the last 3 or 4 seasons. But at the same time, he's a guy who, for the last at least 2 years, I've been saying needs to go west, needs to leave Ukraine, because I've seen his progress and his development stall. And that is Viktor Tyshenkov. Another one of the class of 2019, that those under 20 group. I knew this kid was pretty good when he was starting for Dynamo as an 18-year-old. And he scored something like 14 domestic goals as an 18-year-old, as sort of a part-time starter, because Yarmolenko was still there. It was right before Yarmolenko went to Dortmund. He's an interesting player. He's not as pacey as Modric. By the way, he's a right-sided player. So he's a right winger, can play right mid, but he's really more of a right forward. So think of him as, I don't know, hobo setting Slavic version. If you want Mo Salah on the cheap, and the cheap end version of Mo Salah's production, which interestingly enough, 3 years ago, he was linked with Liverpool to be the Salah, deputy. He's not as pacey as Modric. His passing is quite good. His football IQ is quite high. And that's partially because his old man played for, almost every club in, the old Ukrainian second division. And I think he played abroad in Bulgaria, Israel. He's one of those Eastern European journeymen. So he grew up around the game. Unlike Modric, who's finishing really, was a late development, this kid can score goals. And he's going to a very interesting situation. He's a little bit older, he's 25. And he's going to Spain, and he's going to Girona, which doesn't sound big on the surface, but then you look at the La Liga table and you see them smack in the middle. And I think this is the way that I view this. Is this the big move to the West that he wanted, and which I think could have happened if it wasn't for, let's say, COVID and, I don't know, foreign invasion? No. But if he balls out in Spain and solidifies this team as kind of a mid-table team, maybe in 2 years or maybe even a year or so, we're revisiting this, and he is making a move to a a team in Germany, or maybe team in Italy, or even a mid-table team in the EPL. I think he could actually start for about a third of the teams in the EPL.
Yeah, well, two things here. One, I think that first of all, everyone in Ukraine, when I was there, they took great pride when their players went to the West. Even if they weren't succeeding, even if they weren't as big as they were in Ukraine, I think even in peaceful times, a move like that, and a move to a top five league from any non-top five league, I don't care if it's
Exactly.
Belgium or
Exactly.
whatever, it's a step up. But I think the second part here too, why this could be good, is that a crucial element of young development is playing time.
Hmm.
And maybe had he signed with Liverpool or one of the bigger English or top three Spanish clubs, he wouldn't get that playing time. He'd be behind people. So here he gets to step up his pace in the league, step up the strength and physicality. But at the same time, he should get to play.
Yeah, he's probably going to start. And that was my sort of issue when he was being linked with Liverpool. I was like, having a Ukrainian player and having a Ukrainian player that came up through the academy of my club in Ukraine would have been cool. But you would have effectively been Taki Minamino, right? You'd get the cup matches, maybe you'd come on as a sub in beatdowns, but you're not going to supplant arguably one of the best players in the world. And so I actually, in a weird way, love this move for him, because I do think his stock can improve. And like you said, a move to any Big Five league is a step forward. I mean, you'd be playing for a Southampton. That's still a step up as far as
Right.
I'm concerned. And it's funny, and I don't want to go too far in this vein. It's funny you say, for Ukrainians, when Ukrainian players go to the West, even though it may hurt your club team, there was always this sense of pride and this sense of, okay, this guy's going to, do well. And also this will eventually ideally help the national team.
Right.
Vice versa, my experience with Russian fans has been not the opposite, but you get a 50-50 where you get Russian fans who are like, yes, send our guys west, they'll be good. But you get this weird like nationalist thing where it's like, no, they should stay in the motherland. And it's like, what? So, and they can rot at, Dynamo Moscow and, stay that same guy they were when they were 24.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different, it's honestly, it's kind of the entire casus belli of an actual
Yeah,
war.
it really is. And that's something that I've been thinking about recently. And I'm like, there are Russian fans that have functioning brain cells and aren't like, hyper nationalists, but like that has come up a lot with, in conversation with Russian fans. And it's like, but at best, your league will only be like the seventh best in Europe, and you have to like come to grips with that. Like
Right.
once you do that, everything's going to be all right, supposedly. Great segue though into the last bit of this topic that I want to discuss. Yaroslav Rakititsky,
Okay.
center back, big dude, played for the Ukrainian national team, became the scapegoat, villain, fall guy for everything that was wrong in Ukraine via Russia relations before the official outbreak of hostilities. When 4 years ago, Shakhtar Donetsk sold him to Zenit St. Petersburg. And I sort of, at the time, I, like a lot of Ukrainians, were like, what the? But then I sort of started to reel it, and I was like, hold on. He came out very quickly and was like, I didn't want to go to Russia. I wanted to go to the West, but there was no deal. Gazprom came in, Shakhtar, which is a Ukrainian club, said this is the best deal. You're going to St. Petersburg. So, I was okay. I sort of he warmed up to me a little bit, and some of the stuff thrown at him, it was like, oh, his Ukrainian's bad, and it's like he was born in the Donbass in the late '80s. Of course, his Ukrainian's bad. Most Ukrainians that were born in the Donbass in the late '80s speak effed up Ukrainian. Come on, man! Like
If they do
Shevchenko,
at all. Yeah.
Shevchenko, who's the model of Ukrainian football, had to learn Ukrainian as an adult. So, like, come on, don't crucify him for that. And to Rakititsky's credit, the day war started, he was like, "I'm getting out of here. I don't
Right.
care about my contract. I'm getting out of here." He's been chilling in Turkey for a bit, but yesterday it was announced the prodigal son is coming home
I heard that.
in the
Yes.
Europa
Back
League.
to Shakhtar.
Yeah, he's back at Shakhtar, and I think this is really cool. Because he was a guy who I felt was sort of every word he said was somehow twisted by certain factions in Ukraine to make it look like he was some kind of crazy pro-Russian guy. When he would say things like, "Look, the Donbass is different from Galicia." It is. Does that mean that Donbass is a separate place from Galicia? No, he never said that. So why are you assuming he's saying this? So I think this is kind of a weird feel good story, and I wish him the best.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do too. And what the heck? If he's going to help your club, what's the problem? There's it's pretty clear that he actually is not pro-Russian, because he'd still be there. I mean, there are the real crazy pro-Russian Ukrainians are still
in Russia. Yeah.
right.
So,
So
it's the fact that he left almost instantaneously, and he could have stayed in Turkey and made a fair amount of money, and he was playing for one of the Istanbul clubs, which probably means you have a pretty decent shot of winning the league. And he decided to come back. So I'm, big ups to men like Yaroslav.
yeah. So
So
I've got a question for you, right? Like while we're talking about transfers out of Ukraine,
mhm.
I think the hottest Ukrainian name right now is Ilya Zabarny.
Yes,
Yeah,
my boy.
right. Well, I would imagine he would be, but he's popping up. I've seen him on Chelsea fan boards, and I've seen him on some Arsenal fan boards that happen to mix in with the Chelsea fan board. Talk to me about him and what do you think his prospects are? Is it too early for him to move because he's only 20?
I think he would be best served staying in Ukraine for at least one more year or two, because he's a center back, and
Right.
it takes center backs a little longer. And if he went to Chelsea, maybe he'd get playing time off the bat, but that's questionable. At Arsenal, at best, he's their fourth, probably even fifth choice at the moment. In terms of the excitement, the hype, if he can avoid major injury and his career trajectory keeps going the way it is, I think it's real. He's tall, he's fast, he can play out the back, and he looks like a modern day center back. And the fact that he crashed into the starting 11 of the Ukraine side at the last Euros at the age of 18, that's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. And I've heard, being that he's a Dynamo product, we've been hearing about him since he was a 14-year-old. The thing was, this guy is the next guy. And so I think it's a little premature. I hope he stays in Ukraine for at least another year. And if he does make a move west, it's funny you mentioned Belgium. The Belgian Premier League has been very, very good for developing Ukrainian players. Ruslan Malofsky has been through there. Yaremchuk. a move to maybe a smaller Western European league and then a move to a larger club probably would do him a bit better because, like you said, he's only 20 years old.
Right. So one more young name for you who's I think words starting to circulate. Anatoly Trubin,
Oh,
Shakhtar goalie.
yes,
Again, young. He's only 21.
real young, painfully young
Um,
for a goalkeeper.
and really goalkeepers, I think their primes are sort of later than field players because
I would,
and
I
not
would,
only that, their careers last longer.
I would agree. I don't think you really know what you have in a goalie until they're about 24, 25.
Right. But anyway, he's a person that's been circulating on radars. I believe he on the national team
He
for the year?
was he was the backup in the last series of matches before
Yeah.
the World Cup.
So
He he's a guy who's interesting. Andrei Piatov has been at Shakhtar pretty much my entire adult life because I think he's our age. I think he's like 38.
right.
And he was the guy, and their strategy for years was to get like a rent a vet as the number two. And so when they decided to go young with Turbin at age 18, he was the number two, as early as 2 years ago. That was a bit surprising. That was a sign that, this kid could be special. And I'll be honest, I don't think he's been the best keeper in the Ukrainian league this year, but between the age, between the obvious talent, he's the guy with the biggest upside. My fear with him moving too early is I was having the same conversation about another young Ukrainian goalkeeper about 4 or 5 years ago, and that was Andrei Lunin. And like, it's cool that Andrei Lunin is the number two at Real Madrid, but Andrei Lunin don't see pitch.
Right.
He just chills. And like, I don't know when or if, because I assumed by this point, Lunin would be the starter for the national team. Because he's more talented than Bushan, but Bushan plays
Right.
and he doesn't. And so with Turbin, he's a guy to keep an eye out for the future. But I really think it'd be very premature for him to potentially move, unless, and I sort of wish Byron Robb was here. Bayern Munich maybe got into their senses that eventually Manuel Neuer will have to go, and you can't just like replace. It can't be a revolving door of old dudes.
Right.
And like he was brought into a situation like that where he was explicitly told, "You are the successor. You might sit bench for like 2 years, but after 2 years, you got the job, and you play all the domestic cup matches. That's you."
Yeah. No, that would be a good situation, and it's great if you could find it, but you don't always do.
Yeah. And sometimes those situations appear to be that, but then it becomes something entirely different.
Sure. And especially in the modern money football era,
Mm-hmm.
well, all of a sudden this other flavor of the moment crops up, like Kepa, and we got to pay 70 million for him. And now, now we're stuck with him.
Yep. So let's shift gears, and this is going to be painful for both of us, but we are strong, we're fortified. Let's talk about your beloved Chelsea Football Club first. Things have been bad, my man. Things have been real bad, and some of it, as an outsider, I understand and see why, but especially when you're talking, I go back to some very wise words my aunt once told me, and it was in regards to not this football, but the other football. And this shows you how old I am. I'm a Dolphins fan. She's a Jets fan. And we brought in Ray Lucas as our backup quarterback. And she was like, "This is a mistake." And I said, "Oh, he looked okay with you guys." And she's like, "You don't know how bad anything is until you're at the end of it. Then you truly understand how bad and dysfunctional it is." And she was absolutely right. As an outsider, I can offer you those perspectives in terms of Liverpool in a little bit, but I can't offer, there are things I don't see. from the outside. So dissect.
Well, yeah, not going well. As I mentioned before, I think the worst flaw that Chelsea have had and have shown recently is it's like lack of desire, lack of interest. The guys who are on the pitch, when Joao Felix came and made his debut and promptly was shown a red card, earning a suspension for 3 games. But when he was out there against Fulham, I was like, wow, this guy's great. The life he's bringing, it makes me excited. And when he was out there, even though we went down right before the half, it was like, well, we're going to win. We're a better team than they are. He just brought that life and that energy. And they need that out of Mudryk, only in small doses for right now. But the players who they have just don't really seem like they have any intention of staying around for a long time. And it shows.
I've noticed this. Their body language is particularly bad. And I'm wondering, again, the outsider versus insider thing. Is it because they just for some reason haven't bought into Potter? Is it a Potter issue? Or is it the fact that going into this season, I didn't think you guys were going to be this bad, but I could see this going kind of sour because I'm a big believer in you have to have a project. And
Right.
Chelsea's problem in let's call it late Abramovicism, was by the time Abramovich left, there were 6 different projects there.
Yeah.
And it is this weird, badly sewn together Frankenstein monster. And I'm wondering if part of it's there's so many guys from so many rebuilds that they're all just like, my contract's going to be up at this point, or I'm not going to be here after June anyway. For hell with it. Is it a combo of those 2 things, or is it one more than the other?
There's definitely those 2 things, but there's also something else. First of all, what you have to understand about Chelsea and why I'm a little bit optimistic for the future, just what I'm seeing out of this ownership and management, who are unproven, so it's a little bit of faith, is that they're still a Frankenstein monster. All right, Graham Potter was brought in during this season. It's only been a couple of months, and I know in Chelsea,
after the transfer window closed and they spent a lot of money on his predecessor's guys.
yeah,
Yeah.
then he comes in. Yeah, so he's had no say on any of the players that are on the pitch for them. And I do genuinely think that he's struggling a bit to find their best positions, find out what their talents are, because the problem is they kept bringing in 10s, and now they have a whole team of 10s, or who are 10 slash wingers, who are at times, it appears, lost out there on the pitch. I mean, Mason Mount, who's impressed all the way, he's from the Chelsea academy, but it almost doesn't look like he wants to be there anymore. He's got, I believe, only 2 goals in the league this year. He had some better luck in the Champions League, but again, you're playing against inferior opponents there. It's not the Premier League where every week is a challenge, and he just doesn't seem to be up for it anymore. And it's hard to fathom what has changed, unless he's realized that under Graham Potter, he's not going to get something that he had before. And so I think, signs like that people are on their way out. I think Hakim Ziyech, we saw in the World Cup what kind of talent that guy has. But when he's out there on the pitch for Chelsea, if he's not taking a free kick, you don't see it at all. Like, he doesn't have that go for it spirit, So I mean, that's the first part of it, is that it is a Frankenstein monster. 2, the players not doing it, but third, and I genuinely believe that this is an enormous problem too, is the amount of injuries they have. Because so you've got Broja, who we mentioned before, Pulisic, Raheem Sterling's out, N'Golo Kante's out. Like guys that just brought in, Zakaria is out, Fofana is out, Reece James and Ben Chilwell. Those are your bookends.
Well, and I want to go back to Conte, and look, he's been hurt quite a bit these last couple of years, but when he is fully healthy, he's still screw 6. I think he's one of the best all-around midfielders in the world when healthy, but he's become that dude now. I've always liked Zakaria. I want the Liverpool to get him last year. When you don't have a spine, hint, I'll be talking about this. It's kind of hard to win matches. It really is. Because
Yeah.
Kovacic, who I like, can only do so much, and he's not really a full-on defensive midfielder. Maybe you can get away with him like in a double pivot, but even that's kind of pushing. He's more of a box-to-box 8.
Right. No, and I mean this on the back of this jersey right here is Christian Pulisic, but I think that his brittle nature is the same as N'Golo Kante, and I think that he's probably not going to be in their plans going forward just because he can't be.
Mm-hmm.
They've seemed to have a change of heart on Conte. Conte is out of contract at the end of the season, and the talkings and the rumors in the fall were that they were not going to be re-signing him, or he didn't want to re-sign with Chelsea. Now it appears he does, and I think that that's great because, again, I agree with you that he is. I think he's maybe the best box-to-box midfielder in the whole world when he's healthy.
When healthy, I still think he's a top 5. Again, just screw positioning. He's a top 5 midfielder in the world, and sometimes, again, we'll talk about this, the balance between young and old. Sometimes having experienced old dudes, but old dudes where you can manage their minutes so they're not constantly injured, but have that, that kind of talent there, that's useful, especially if he's going to come back, not at a reduced rate, but let's say a club kind of friendly rate.
Right. Well, maybe this is a good spot to transition here, because let me tell you why I would rather be in our club situation than in yours. Because first of all, I think a big key to our failures this season are the injuries. We've been injured constantly all through the season. And I know that's something you can't control. It's going to happen to your team. You can build the best team and that can happen, and then you won't be. But more so than that, I'm more hopeful going forward because it seems now like Chelsea have accepted that they're in a rebuild. They're taking steps to change the culture and the times at Chelsea. We do have a relatively fresh new manager, and Graham Potter, for his success at Brighton, was not really successful in the beginning. In fact, I used to mock them constantly on this program for just seeming as though they just wanted to stick around in the league and not actually try to win anything. Boy, they look different now, but that's Graham Potter's players, Graham Potter's system. So I think that there's a kernel of optimism to me that this is the bottom, that we have hit the bottom. And I just don't think that you have.
No, we haven't.
What do you think?
I would agree with you. And I think a lot of that is, it's funny, you said acceptance, and acceptance is the first step to recovery.
It is.
I was beating the drum last year when we were in all 4 competitions, and sometimes I might sound like a crazy person. Mike was like, "You guys are doing fine," and part of me was thinking in the back of my head, "But you're a United fan. Like, you can't use that as a gauge. That's effed up." I was saying last year, this team is at a weird crossroads moment. The cycle, and a lot is made of 4 years. I don't think you can run a football club like the Soviets ran their economy. You can't have a 5-year plan. But you have to understand the shelf life of a particular, cycle.
Right.
And you also have to, I'm a big fan of, even if you have 3 or 4 very good things, because I'm OCD, that's my particular form of mental illness, you should then have a plan B, a plan C, maybe even plan 9 from outer space, raise the dead, to just, make sure, because things like injuries happen, and like, you can't judge with athletes. Like, you can be the best at your position in the world, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, in one off season, fall off a cliff. We see this happen all the time.
I mean, yeah,
We
no, I agree with it. I think that maybe I don't know if it was Jurgen Klopp or the ownership or whatever, but I think that they really, really underestimated the impact of losing Sadio Mane. Not even, I mean, obviously Sadio Mane is an incredible offensive talent, but he was also the key to the defense. Starting the forward
yeah,
defense and getting in there and messing things up. They
I
lacked that this year.
I I still say that that time, especially because Mane effectively said, "I want out," but we sort of were like, "Okay, can you stay one more year?" If it was up to me, look, he'd still be there. He's one of my all-time favorite Liverpool players for a big reason. Because when we think about this cycle that has been so successful, he's really Klopp's first big signing, and he's definitely the one where when we signed him, I was like, I believe. Like,
Right.
I believe now. We'll talk about who is to blame and who is not to blame. That is certainly part of it. Uh, I will say this, and this part of it's injuries. I was talking to my aunt, who, even though she is a Jets fan, boo, she's also become weirdly a Liverpool fan, vicariously through me. And she was like, "Is Mo just not having a good year?" And I'm like, "No, he's actually having a pretty decent year. It's just Mo is everything that he can do is conditioned on those people around him.
Yeah. So
Jota, Jota's been hurt all year. Diaz, who was probably the closest, and he still can't do what Mane could do tracking back, but he's the closest in terms of a guy who could do that. I think that's the biggest miss in the front, up top. Nunez is who Nunez is. Uh, I I I said at the beginning of the season when we signed him, I was happy, but I was like, I don't think you can judge him on this year. And comparing him to Haaland, I think is fraudulent. Haaland was playing at Dortmund and Salzburg, for a couple of years. This guy was in the Spanish second division this time 2 years ago. So the problem, the big problem is, yes, you're missing what Mane could do tracking back, and that masked things last year. So I guess this is where our points come together.
right.
The midfield, which was boring. When we were winning, people were like, "Oh, Liverpool's midfield's boring." You know what? It was boring. It was freaking effective. We had an engine room. You
Right.
put out Gini Wijnaldum, Fabinho, and Henderson. Okay, it wasn't anything flashy, but I was like, we can retain the ball. We can press when we have to press. And they're going to shield the defense so they can do what they can do best. And there's that extra layer there. So, Mane could track back and do his stuff, but he could also get involved in linking up with Salah, Firmino, etc. The midfield is dead, Mike. And it's been dead because we let we we let Ronaldo go, but we never replaced him. We signed Thiago, who, when he's healthy, because he's one of those guys now too, when healthy, is world class. But he's a very different kind of player. And in some ways, I remember when we signed him, I was like, this is kind of a luxury signing. It's kind of like Ozil at Arsenal. And I'll finish up talking about Arsenal, because if you remember the late Arsene Wenger days, I'm getting kind of those vibes a little bit. Uh Fabinho's having the worst, and this is the most inexplicable one because he was great last year, and now all of a sudden he's not. Whether that's because he's in the middle of a divorce, he's in his head and in his feels about the Brazil situation. I don't know. Henderson's declining, and he's been declining for a long time. James Milner should not be there.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, so that's the question. Is the midfield of Liverpool too old?
it's
And how do you how do you repair it quickly? Or is it going to be a rebuild? Do you let guys like Harvey Elliott come along?
here's the thing. It's not it's Christ, it's Germany in the last year of World War II. It's old, but it's also entirely too young. The only guy who should be quote unquote in their prime is Naby Keita, and he's a walking mass unit.
Yeah.
Cannot rely upon him. And I'm shocked he's still on the team because my assumption was in the summer he was either going to sign like a 2 or 3 year kind of prove it thing, or we were going to sell him so we could get money to buy at least one box to box midfielder. I think the plan going forward, first of all, I want to say this right now. And part of it is if I was him, I wouldn't want to come to my club. Liverpool fans, waiting for Jude Bellingham is like waiting for Godot. Stop it. If he shows up somehow, some way, cool. But here's the problem, and I think you hit it, Mike. One guy is not going to solve this problem.
Right. But so like I don't really understand the whole Jude Bellingham thing because what you've got Jota.
Mm-hmm.
You just signed Gakpo. You've just signed Nunez. I mean, Firmino's there. Yes, he's old, but he's there.
Yeah.
Where do you put him? And then do you end up like Chelsea is now with all these guys who are too good not to play and too expensive to not play, but not really good for anything systematic?
That's just it. Like going back to the sort of model we had, our midfield was boring, but it was really effective by being boring, and that set everything up. Because the big myth about this year's Liverpool is, oh, the defense has been so bad. The defense has actually been okay, but when the midfield's a sieve, I don't care who you have back there, and the defense looks scared. Like that's the one thing that I've noticed strictly recently. Guys like Robertson and Van Dijk, who normally never get the deer in the headlights look, have like the permanent deer in the headlights look. This is going to be a legit rebuild, and I don't think the bleeding's going to stop, and we can really assess where the project is heading probably until sometime next fall. Because I don't think one guy. I think Deadwood needs to go.
Right.
Oxlade-Chamberlain, who I forget's even on the damn team until he shows up because someone's inevitably hurt. He needs to leave. I wish him the best. I like him very much as a human being, but he should have been gone 2 years ago. Milner, same kind of thing. If you want to come back as a coach, cool. You ain't going on no pitch. Henderson,
I feel like Milner's the kind of guy who he shouldn't dress as much as he does. Like if you're there, you're the mascot, whatever. You're the not real team captain, but kind of the locker room guy.
In a perfect universe, that's what he would be. But we have a situation now where we have to rely upon. Right. And that's the problem. Like his presence, I don't mind, but at the same time, it's like the fact that we see him now week in and week out at the age of 37 is kind of a problem. Henderson, look, his leadership can't be replaced. I've always been saying this the last 2 years, we should be slowly phasing him out. We should be doing with him what we were doing with Milner there for a while. I think Fabinho is going to get corrected, but he's the one that's inexplicable to me. I have no idea why he's this bad. Keita, his contract's up, let him walk. And this is going to sound kind of radical. Thiago's contract is up after next season. If a Spanish club wants to pay us money, I sell him.
Yeah.
I sell him. And I think Harvey Elliott is one for the future. I love this kid a lot, even though he looks like my pothead student that sits in the back of class.
I do
But
too, by the way. Yeah.
he's an extremely creative player. You can tell that he's a number eight, a proper number 8 in the waiting, but that's going to be 2 years down the run. Like he has to dramatically improve defensively. I know we've talked about this both, I think, on air and off air, and I know my comrade Will is called the Prince of Darkness, but I wonder where he got that nickname sometimes. I think he's too nice. Look, I like Curtis Jones, but Curtis Jones is the same player he was 3 years ago. Either we say, okay, you're part of this plan, which I'm not certain if I trust him being part of this plan, or you at very least put him out on loan, give him playing time for a year to figure out what you have, or maybe you sell him too. This Bajcetic kid, but he's a kid. He's literally a fetus. He's like one of my students. He's 18.
Yeah.
I like him a lot, but you can't rely upon an 18-year-old. I think Deadwood has to be cut, and I think in the summer, and this is where this is, I've really gone off the whole Bellingham thing. Bellingham is sublimely talented, but one guy doesn't fix this mess. With the money that you would spend on Bellingham, I have 3 names. I don't
Okay.
think they're going to sign all 3 because part of it might be the owners. We'll talk about blame in a second. Matheus Nunes, who I brought up, when we talked about Portugal in the World Cup. We could have had this guy in the summer. We were in on him. And for some reason, I don't know, we were like, oh, well, he'll go to Wolves and show with the Portuguese guys and we'll get him. We're apparently back in on him. He's going to be probably 10 to 15 million pounds more expensive. Thank you, FSG. But he's still relatively affordable. And I really like this kid, especially having watched him now in the 2 cup ties against Wolves. Like, Wolves look dangerous when he's on the pitch because he can maintain possession and he can, you're going back to some of the stuff Mane did. He does that dirty work that our midfield used to do and just doesn't anymore.
Okay.
Other 2 names they're youngsters, but they're youngsters that have had playing time, and thinking about Klopp kind of guys. Okay, you're not going to get the goal output of a Bellingham, but in 2 years' time, maybe you're looking at, for me, our best midfield in this era.
Oh, well, Matt froze. Oh, man, I really wish that
Just chilling. There he is. He's back.
yeah, you were gone. I wonder, you know what? I wonder which side of the recording we're gonna get, me or you.
It might be both. Which
Yeah.
is kind of crazy. The other 2 names, again, I think about, when this midfield was most effective, it was engine room guys. And the 2 guys that I see, again, you're not going to get the goal output of a Bellingham. It's not going to be that flashy. Kone from Gladbach in the Bundesliga. I love this kid. And, he's a guy who's been starting there regularly for 2 seasons. He's still only 21. He just screams a Klopp player to me. And then a guy who, because I was like, oh, maybe we can move Henderson to the 6, and and I'm like, nah. Let's bring in, I hope I get his name correct, because everyone's talking about his older brother. It's the second son of Lilian Thuram, Kifram Thuram from Nice. I was clued in on this guy. A buddy of mine who follows Ligue 1 was like, hey, you want to check this out? He good. And he has the potential to be very good. I would rather than, breaking the bank for Bellingham, who the success rate of English players who've gone to Germany and gone back to England is 50-50. Like
Yeah.
it is 50-50. I don't think this is a sure thing. I would rather spend our money on three younger.
You're muted. You are the host now.
Oh shit. Okay. This is all on the cloud though, right?
I
Okay. Our man, have
one
fun.
can only hope.
Let's have oh Jesus Christ. So yeah, those would be the three names I would look at. Before we call it a night, because we probably should, because internet issues.
Yeah,
Well, is there storms out by you, Mike?
no, there aren't. No.
Okay, so it might be on my end because the weather's trash down here. Uh, it was literally like 5 degrees colder in the snow. Uh, blame, because we do have to talk a little bit about blame, or at least be able to analyze.
Right.
This is tough because part of it is the ownership. And again, the other Mike, oh man, FSG aren't that bad. That's true. They're not the Glazers. They aren't that bad. But they're still not great. Like they're hella problematic. And as a Liverpool fan, I have real sort of ethical issues with them and some of the things they've pulled. But also to like the way that they spend money is confounding to me. Because they do spend money, but they spend money all at once and they spend it all in one area. So like
Right.
at all the defensive injuries, they were like, let's get a backup left back, backup right back, let's get Kanate. Great. Our defense in the long term is looking good now. But you sacrifice the midfield for that. Up front, okay, we're gonna lose Mane. Let's buy Diaz, Jota, etc. Well, where's the investment in the midfield?
Right.
So they share part of the blame. And it's weird because you said, well, I think at Chelsea, the bleeding stopped. FSG will not be our owners, I think, by this time next year. And I think part of this issue is where we are where you were at last April.
Well, I mean, hopefully your owners don't get sanctioned. But that was my question. I mean, your plan seemed very prudent, but there was no big splash, and that's the problem with the foreign owners is that they don't, they want to see their names in the Twitter, sphere and in the papers and whatever. And there's not really a big splash headline guy to get there that you were saying.
Other than Bellingham, which again, he'd be the splash get, but in terms of actual footballing sense, not so much. I think also part of it too, and this sort of goes back to where I was saying, like, they do spend money, but they spend money weird. Like they came in, and I will always give SSG some credit. They saved us from goddamn insolvency. We were owned by the Royal Bank of Scotland for 48 hours. They instituted effectively Moneyball. But this has always been my issue. Okay, I had no problem with Moneyball up until we won the Champions League. And up until the point where we were one of the third highest grossing clubs in the world. Once you've done that, then you can still do Moneyball stuff. Please find me bargains.
Right.
But now the project should morph, it should evolve, it should advance where, okay, you don't need to just find diamonds in the rough. You can spend money a little bit more freely, but you can use these analytics, you can use, your developmental system that you have in place, you can use these scouts to maximize that even further. And they never really did that. I mean, I always go back to John Henry looked into my eyes and Jurgen Klopp's eyes after we won the Champions League and said, you can have anything. And that summer, he gave us Adrian, Harvey Elliott, which actually might look pretty good, in the future, and some dude called Sepp Vandenberg. So the owners and the ownership situation, the fact that we don't know who our owners are going to be, I think, by this time next year. And that's very much yet to be determined. And I don't think it's funny. I do think obviously Red Sox and Liverpool are separated. But I think it is very interesting that because this group is trying to buy, from my understanding, at least one NFL team and potentially an NBA team, both of the teams that they currently own, it seems that they're just like, well, if someone's good, re-sign them. But other than that, sorry, the cash register's locked, man. So there's something to be said about that. This is tough for me, but I'm a realist and I speak truth.
Yeah.
I love Jurgen Klopp, but he also shares some blame here.
Enough blame for him to go, do you think? I mean,
No, and I'll tell you why. And I've been hearing a lot of, and if you only know Klopp from Dortmund, it's true, but that's not his entire experience. The I don't think he's lost the team, and that's the thing. Like you see, the match against Brighton in the league is the worst match I've ever seen under.
it was not good for you.
That was awful. I actually
Did not work out.
I stopped watching after the 75-minute mark, went and answered student emails, and then ingested edible, get highly relaxed substances and turn on a movie, which I've never done before in the Klopp era. I used to do that a lot, like under Roy Hodgson. But there's this myth he doesn't do rebuilds. He didn't really do a rebuild at Dortmund, or he wasn't afforded to do one. He did one at Mainz, though. He took over at Mainz, got them into the Bundesliga. Then they had to sell all their players because they're freaking Mainz. They got relegated, and then he got them out of relegation with effectively a new team. So he's done the rebuild thing. And going back to the ownership thing, I have been told that apparently he was tipped off by the ownership before he signed that they were thinking about selling. And people close to him, apparently they've been told, well, he wants to do his thing, but he wants to have a chance to do his thing with Pep Guardiola money for like 3 or 4 years, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting because I almost thought that part of the reason why Liverpool, although Liverpool does spend money, but part of the reason why they didn't spend money the way sort of the Chelsea and City especially do was his philosophy.
That's part of it, but well, let's talk about his philosophy and where that does get to sort of the blame. When he says, if you take youth development out of football, I believe football, I believe him. But I don't think he's a crazy person that believes you can like literally develop 11 brand new players. Like, I think we're seeing the fruit of that in Harvey Elliott, but I don't think he's that committed to that sort of small club kind of ethos.
Right. Certainly. You're not going to see like the Liverpool or I'm sorry, Manchester United class of 92 anymore. Exactly. That's not the way that football works anymore. Exactly. Because any of those guys, I mean, they started breaking up when the big money started coming in. Beckham went to Spain. I mean, it just doesn't operate that way anymore. So if you think your football club is going to raise up 11 guys like they did in the 70s, they're not.
Yeah, no, he's not that crazy, but he knows he can develop players and he can polish up really talented players. And so it's funny when assessing the ownership, I think the ownership actually did a better job before Klopp showed up, and they've been kind of living and coasting off of Klopp since then. And here's the thing, I think Klopp is too nice, but also in some ways kind of comfortable with, let's say, appeasing management a little bit. And that's the first major issue. Like, I think deep down he knew we needed midfielders this summer, but I think he deluded himself at some point during the summer. Well, if like last year everybody stays healthy, which they won't, I can somehow work my magic, and I don't want to run my owners over, with the, push cart. And so you got these kind of like weird sort of excuses from him. And like, even as the summer, the Man United brigade was like, oh, now he's excuse central. And I'm like, but I've seen these kinds of excuses before in a similar situation. It was Arsene Wenger the last 10 years at Arsenal, where Wenger knew everything was screwed up, but Wenger was too just like nice of a guy, and he didn't want to upset team harmony and stuff, where he wasn't going to go in front of microphones and be like your boy Jose Mourinho and be like the owner's trash. Like, he's not going to do that. So that's kind of part of the problem. And like,
And I can I say this too, that's I think part of Potter's problem right now is that he doesn't have that footing yet. I mean, granted, we're not even half a year into him, but I think that his team needs they need a kick in the ass.
Yeah, I think he's a little too nice, and I think he's been a little too loyal to certain guys who, and that doesn't mean you're ruthless, you chuck them out the door. But you sit the likes of Bobby Firmino, Henderson down and be like, you are going to be gradually phased out. You're still going to be an important part of this, but you're not going to be as important a part as you once were. And if you desperately want more playing time or something, please let me know so we can sell you. Like, you have to have those difficult conversations with those older kind of fringier players. The other thing, which is a little bit more of an issue, is he's loyal to a T. He's also stubborn to a T. And this is where like I'm starting to get like a little crazed. I'm like, but here's the crazy thing about this season. You saw him be tactically flexible from like the middle of October to the World Cup when we were playing four, I think 4-4-2, 4-2-2-2-2. I didn't know what it was, but that was great because neither did the freaking opposition. And we looked okay. He's reverted back to this goddamn 4-3-3 with the high line. Klopp,
Well, I mean, that is Liverpool with the false nine high line, Jurgen Klopp.
we don't have false nine. I wouldn't even call Bobby a false nine. Bobby is what every team that wants peak Bobby is what every team that wants to do the false nine wants to have in a false nine.
Right.
Holding striker is what I call them.
Yeah.
The literally the human Swiss Army knife. That guy's not walking through the door anymore. And if you wanted him, we should have actually kind of been on the João Felix train because I think he might be the closest in world football to that. So we're doing the 4-3-3 with high line. If the midfield can't regain position, don't play a high line. It's bad. It's gonna look bad. And that's what I mean. Like, the defense has been good, but the defense is being asked to do too much. The real hero of that Brighton game, it was Ibu Kanate. Because if he wasn't in there, that would have been worse. That would have been 7-0. So, some kind of tactical flexibility. And we don't have like frontline guys at the moment. We're playing the likes of Gecko out of position. We're playing Ox as a winger, which is never a good thing.
Oh,
No, like,
no.
okay. So we have Salah. Put him as a striker, or have him as a striker in the front too. I know this is going to sound radical as hell for a club team, but you can still press. You can still be offensive with this. Maybe when Van Dijk goes back, maybe actually contemplate a back three. Because we've been like, okay, so Trent's not the greatest defensive right back. Then maybe have him as a right wing back, right? Where he's being asked to be more offensive and he can do, that defensive stuff.
I mean, I've always felt that that's the natural position for him because there's been so many times where he's looked bad defensively.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, like, so the ownership is to blame, Klopp is to blame. In some cases, situations and circumstances, because, but again, I think this goes more back to the ownership because I think they used the pandemic as a crutch to be like, we cannot give you money because, pandemic settings, but it's like, you guys are doing just fine. So we'll see. But I guess I hope I did a good job of dissecting this. But ultimately, I agree with you, Mike. I don't think this the ship ain't sunk, but the water's going to keep going in. And the only way you plug that hole is you bring in at least two, ideally three new midfielders in the next window.
Yeah, we're there with you because we need new midfielders too. Jorginho, he's just on the way out. And Kovacic, as good as he is, he's one of these subtle guys that you're talking about, a gear turner who's not going to score goals, and so is N'Golo Kante, frankly. But I mean, Kovacic he's in his 30s, and the time to start transitioning is now.
And that's the
And I
thing.
think that just the sheer breadth, if not the depth, but the breadth of your complaints against the Liverpool Football Club show how much worse the situation is. And I agree with you on all of it. So I have one last question because we really should go. Liverpool and Chelsea are playing each other in the noontime match this week at Anfield. Who wins?
I hate to say it. I think this is going to end in a crappy draw.
Yes, I was going to say the exact same thing.
It's the goddamn draw because if you could tell me at least Nunez was going to be healthy, I'm like, okay, we could give their backline some problems. What we do bad, what they do bad, kind of cancels each other out. Yeah, this screams like 1-1, 2-2, and like ugly draws, like where we're like, how did that happen? And that's the other thing too. Liverpool has this tendency, even guys who are in form, when the guys around them aren't, they get in their heads and they try to do too much. Allison, point. How many times over the last couple of weeks has he made a little screw up and it's like he doesn't trust what's in front of him? That's why. Comes out, tries to be Superman. I'm going with a 1-1 or a 2-2 draw.
See, I think we'd be lucky to get a 1-1 draw. I'm just hoping it's not 0-0.
Yeah,
especially that early match. Both Chelsea and Liverpool tend to play really crappy in the early Saturday match. Liverpool are coming off the FA Cup replay. Chelsea didn't have that, but half the guys out there don't want to play. So not like, I mean, unless they're injecting them with amphetamines in the locker room, it's got 0-0 written all over it. And please don't be that.
I don't think this is, but hey, that's where both of our clubs are at the moment.
I know.
Anyway, thank you for coming on. Hopefully, the engineer, the mighty Stead, can piece this thing together. There were some, weather-related interruptions. I'm Professor Matt. This is Chelsea Mike. This is the Too Many Guys. In this case, only two guys. Soccer show. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves.